First, what has always been amazing about Stanley and that he is truly a clarinet player. That is what he does.
Hi, I'm Sean Perrin, and you're listening to the Clarinet Podcast, the show for clarinetists looking for in-depth, career-accelerating conversations about all that's neat and new for the clarinet. You can subscribe to the show and learn more at clarinet.com. On today's show, Jerome Bunke returns for the second time to the program to discuss Stanley Drucker's Heritage Collection Discs 8 and 9, for which he is the producer. We also discuss the state of music post-COVID and why it's so important to get back to concerts not just as musicians but also as audiences, and some of his own upcoming CD and performance projects. Don't forget that as a Clarinet listener, you can get a signed copy of the Heritage Collection Disc 8 and 9 at digitalforce.com by using code Clarinet89 with your purchase. That's code Clarinet and the numbers 89, all one word, with your purchase. Thank you so much to our season sponsors and those supporting the show directly at clarinet.com/join for making today's show possible. And thank you, of course, to you for listening. The new Bakun Q-Series clarinet features a completely redesigned bore inspired by the Bakun Custom Series clarinets. This means you can play and perform like the pros, but for less. Use code CLARINET at bakunmusical.com to save 10% on your entire purchase and try the Bakun Q-Series or Protege clarinet risk-free for 30 days. Just pay the return shipping if you aren't fully satisfied. Shop now at bakunmusical.com and use code CLARINET at checkout. Imagine a reed that lets you focus on your music, lasts for months instead of days, and even saves you money in the long run. It's all possible with Leger reeds, the world's leading synthetic reed brand made right here in Canada. The European cut reed is preferred by Leger artists all over the world, including Eddie Daniels, David Schifrin, Corrado Giuffretti, and many others. It offers a warm, clean sound with a great ease of articulation and is now available for E-flat, B-flat, and the bass clarinet. Learn more at your local music store. Or you can now save 10% on your Leger reeds with code CLARINET at checkout at leger.com. That's LEGERE.com. So I'm here on the podcast today with Jerome Bunke, who is a seasoned veteran of the podcast here, having been on before way back in 2017. Jerry, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Always a pleasure to be with you, Sean.
You know, before we get started, I do just want to say that some listeners will start noticing that I'm now finally starting to get back into some of the original guests that were on the program. I remember back in the day, like 2016, 2017, saying a lot of, hey, we'll have to chat again in the future sometime. But the future went by so quickly, and here we are 5 years later. And so it's really great to have Jerry back on. And just before this episode, you will have heard from Stanley Drucker again. And I've actually got some other guests lined up, like Evan Zaporin. Strangely enough, these people are all from New York, lined up to talk to me again here on the program. But it's not just thanks to these great guests to come back, but also the fact that they talked to me the first time. And thank you to you as well, the listener, for having been here the last 5 years, because without you, the show really wouldn't have gotten to this point, and to be able to continue talking to these great guests and having these great conversations. So thanks not only to the guests, but also to the listeners for making, this kind of revisit possible. So Jerry, it's been 5 years, and I think the last time I saw you was down at in person at Clarinet Fest in 2017. So maybe let's do a quick sort of update in your life, what's been going on, and we'll get into sort of how you've been dealing with the whole COVID situation, if that's okay as well, musically and otherwise as well. So how have you been?
Well, luckily we've been fine, and what has happened is that a lot of projects that had been dormant have come back that I was involved with. One personally is one where I'm appearing on a soon-to-be-released CD, which is duet albums by the violinist James Grassick, and I'm pleased that I'm there. Probably it's a whole album that has a lot of violin, cello, violin and piano, violin and viola, and I'm the sole woodwind, so I'm sort of like the sorbet in the middle of all the string playing. So
I like that.
So I'm looking forward to that coming out, and we've also been forging ahead with being able to work very, very closely with a lot of Stanley Drucker's archive material, and have actually come out with 2 volumes in his Heritage Collection. One is entitled From the Vaults, which is volumes Heritage Collection 6 and 7, and just recently another volumes 8 and 9, which are called Hidden Gems. So we're really, pleased that projects have continued and grown and have really helped to try to get into one place a lot of Stanley's recorded repertoire and live concerts to really add to his legacy.
So last time we were chatting, one of the things that struck me was we were talking a bit about how visual art, it exists sort of for eternity. Like on any day of the week, you can open up a picture of your favorite painting and enjoy it, or go see the museum or whatever. But music, you were talking about how it's a bit of a snapshot in time. And so I think that all of us listening can remember the last 2 years, how there was no live music anymore. So these snapshots weren't really happening. And all we had was the recorded music. I just want to kind of your thoughts on that, like philosophically a bit. I mean, how do you think this loss is going to affect music going forward?
Well, I think one of the things that I rue the most about, Sean, really has to do with the effect of music education.
Yeah.
In other words, if I played guitar and you got together, with a couple of people or visited somebody's house or was a guest at a party, you could play music. I find as a clarinetist, there the Stravinsky pieces, maybe the solo movement from Messiaen's Quartet for the End of Time, but you need a harmonic bass to get involved. So in that way, I feel that not having the comradeship of having other musicians around is something which I think is going to be something hard to overcome, especially when you think about formative years. When did you start playing clarinet?
I started at 12, and it's really interesting you say that because the formative years and the social element is so important because I hated music the first year, but my mom had paid for it and she made me continue. And by June, she told me, okay, let's give that clarinet back. I mean, we're not going to do this anymore. And I said, no, I really want to continue. Like by that point, we'd done a tour and all that. And she said, well, I mean, if you're going to do it, you have to really be into it. And I think that's maybe why I'm so kind of into it now is I felt this need to show that I cared at that point, But if it hadn't been for the tours and the friends and the people I met and the things that I saw and the music I got to play and experience in a group setting, I don't think I would have continued. And locally, I heard some really sad news that a lot of band programs have shut down. A lot of band programs at the grade 9 level are running at like the grade 7 level with a quarter capacity that they had 2 years ago. Like it's crazy.
That was sort of the thing. I grew up in upstate New York, and we had a very set up feeder program. I mean, we started with song flutes or tonettes, maybe in second or third grade, and by the time we were in fourth grade, that's when band programs started. And yes, you're right. And the other thing too, which especially is prevalent in probably I know the states. I'm not quite sure whether or not the Canadian system is that well too, but in so many school districts, the music program really is part and parcel of the football game, of having the marching band. And then having a school budget could be cut, but the marching band uniforms for the football games still are there. They're still are intact.
We don't have that as much up here, but I see what you mean. It's just part of almost like not civic pride, but school pride.
Well, it becomes a civic pride because you have areas that are spread out. And in my opinion, this is what socializes the whole community. It's the boosters. It's the Friday night games, the Saturday games of how every aspect of the community participates to make that game a big happening. And that's where everybody gets a lot of their social interaction, and music serves that social function. And if there's a change in the social function, will there be a change in the music?
That's so true. And it's for the musicians too. I mean, me, just like you, I'm not fulfilled. Maybe it's a bad thing as a clarinet player or something, but I'm not fulfilled, I found out, just by sitting in a room practicing by myself for 2 years. There's something about going to an orchestra concert and experiencing the music as a performer that drives me more than just sitting in my practice room refining my scales. And I think that a younger student who's never had that previous performance experience would not understand why we're sitting there. It seems like a drudgery almost. And you talked about this. It's ironic to look back at our conversation because it was a little bit telling of the future, but you also talked about this social need for music. And I think at the time you meant more the social need for music composition, but now we're kind of talking about the social need for music itself and the interaction. But I think that it all kind of sort of plays together. There's two types of people, though. People who I think, and both are okay, but some who kind of shut down over this period and had to focus maybe inwardly on just staying sane. But others seem to have really had a creative explosion. So do you think there's going to be like a post-COVID artistic revival, or are we going to have a bit of a lull?
Well, I also think it's going to depend upon at what levels. And I think when I talk about the education, I think that not having the exposure is going to be detrimental.
It could be detrimental to audiences too in the future.
Yeah, but in other words, where is the going to be the exposure that society has to being able to listen to things, and is so much of it going to be just what people what listen to in compressed formats, rather than seeing the athleticism that performers have, that dancers have, and of how the music and dance, for example, in music and singing, how they all intertwine and go together.
Well, we often experience people saying too things like, oh, it was the year of no concerts or the 2 years, I guess, of no concerts. But they talk about it almost as if like it's just a loss of some sound that we missed. But they forget about the experience, I think, and the social cohesion, like you're saying, that comes from that experience. It was a lot more than just sound lost in a room.
Right. Well, even now, for example, I know there was something, and even you'll find this in TV documentaries, where, gee, it's the 50th anniversary of Woodstock, or even there'll be programs about Beatles, their recording sessions or something like that, similar. And where is that shared group experience that basically unite people. I remember being in a place called Jerome, Arizona, somewhere between Phoenix and Flagstaff, and it was an old copper mine and very, very high, and known for having sort of a very artistic community, and one where one could easily expect to see VW buses and almost like a Woodstock type of atmosphere. So even something like that didn't only stay in Woodstock, New York, but became synonymous with what it is to have, an arty culture, an arty community.
Well, and even though concerts did technically happen, I mean, even I streamed some concerts online, I definitely did not find it to be even close to as memorable or enjoyable as being there in person. I don't think there's going to be a 50th anniversary celebration of some streaming event that happened, you know. And it's I would watch them too, and sometimes I would start watching something and then get distracted by God knows what around my house, a baby crying, lunch has to get made, or the phone rings. I mean, that doesn't happen at a concert. You're there, you're with real people experiencing something real together in a room. So I do hope we can move back to it, and I'm so happy to see that you're coming out of this kind of guns a-blazing with a concert and an album and
all of that stuff. And I think that also is the same way about shared experiences, Sean. If you look at it also from a sporting event, how many people, gee, I was there when so made that last basket, or what you get about the group enthusiasm.
Totally. Yeah, there's more of a sport element to music, I think, than many realized or wanted to admit before all this. That's an interesting kind of relationship.
Yeah. Well, at one point in my career, I was the orchestra manager for the Martha Graham Dance Company. And I remember that we went to, I think, the Coast Guard Academy in Connecticut, and did some concerts, and not concerts, but, ballets and the dance programs. And they also had some of the cadets take some of their warm-ups and their dance classes, and they did not cut it. In other words, they had really not realized the amount of endurance and athleticism that went into dance programs, as contrasted to the calisthenics, you know.
It's interesting too. I mean, I remember I used to be in the marching bands myself. We don't have a lot of them up here, but Calgary has one of the best ones, or the most famous ones, I guess, in Canada. And I was playing drums in that actually, so it was quite a workout, standing there with that 20-30 pound drum all day and running around. And we did field shows, and like the drums are quite intensive to play themselves. And it was exhausting, and it was very much in shape, and so was everybody else. But people would make fun of it, like they're playing football and they think you're some loser in marching band. It's like, you try a 12-hour day in the marching band, playing and memorizing music and running around and staying hydrated and being in the sun, and like it's a lot of work.
But think of this now. You also have another double
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
that you can play, so clarinet and percussion.
absolutely. Yeah. A lot of people played clarinet in the marching band, but I was like, I want to be louder. I want to, I want to cut through a little more. so, so we're talking about all these live concerts, and this is a great segue into when I was talking with Stanley about the Heritage Collection. I sort of was considering, we've got now 9 discs of live recordings from, his career spanning concerts all over the place, really, within New York, other cities, other venues all over the place, but the music too, all over the place, different time periods, but also different like periods in his life too, So, but I was thinking about all the music that he's played, and something like 10,000 some odd concerts with the New York Phil alone, and all the other ones. I did the math, and I told him this, and he laughed, but I think he's been playing clarinet live in concert for like more than 1,000 days in his lifetime, consecutively. So my realization with the Heritage Collection is that this is an incredible output of live recordings. A lot of them one take. This wasn't studio kind of live recordings, but there's just so much more even. Like, so my question to start this off is like, we've got 9 amazing CDs of incredible live performances from all over the place. How many more could there be? And how much of his output as a performer is sort of recorded that, could someday be heard again? And how much do you think is of course, lost to time and being a musical snapshot, as you say?
First, what has always been amazing about Stanley and that he is truly a clarinet player. That is what he does. And a lot of the performances that are represented in the Heritage Collection were done in addition to his responsibilities as clarinetist, as the principal clarinetist in the New York Philharmonic, with a career that spanned more than 60 years, and that's 60. And what I also find is that the high level of artistry, musicianship, technical prowess that was prevalent, it did not matter where the venue was, Sean. In other words, his spontaneity and his passion would come through, whether it was in a school auditorium, whether or not it was in a library, something down the road, or the things that I'm very proud of being able to include in the first 5-disc set were his performances at the Library of Congress with the Juilliard String Quartet. And at that time, the Juilliard String Quartet was, the initial very much group that spawned the chamber music revival, and really were exemplary as far as what they brought artistically, and as far as really helping to solidify chamber music, in our consciousness. And Stanley's performance of the Brahms and the Mozart quintet with them is just absolutely phenomenal. And as you said, a lot of these things were, they're all one takes, and also in 6 and 7, there is also a performance of the Bartok contrasts. And this piece in particular is one of the, I think, engineering marvels that can be experienced. The engineer was Peter Bartok, the composer's son. And this was recorded around 1954, 1955, and it was done with a single mic, one mic. So with one microphone, it's just a phenomenal performance with amazing intensity, and the clarinet cadenza at the end of the first movement can leave one sort of tongue-tied.
So I guess that's what struck me about the 9 discs, though, is that to someone who's just approaching this set of CDs for the first time, it could be like, okay, we've had these recordings, we're sitting on them for a while, and suddenly we're going to release these live concerts. But I believe that you're sifting through an awful lot of material and finding, some of the best performances that are the most interesting, not just the piece, but also the venue or the setting or the occasion or the performance itself. I mean, what is the process like then with someone who's played so much music of, going through these old recordings and looking for the ones that you'd like to include on the sets? Because as producer, you're planning as we discussed last time, the track listing really for the CD and making a lot of those decisions.
Well, one is that none of this would be possible without Stanley and his wife's Naomi participation as far as making a lot of this material available, as well as their input. And the other factor goes into really wanting this to be a broad repertoire, and some of it is we have to make sure that from a sound point of view, that there's enough excellence that one could hear what's going on. Being in the live performances, yes, sometimes there might be, a cough, which only happens, by the way, coughs only happen in slow movements when it's very quiet.
It's a law, right?
Yeah,
A rule
it's
of
written.
music.
Yeah, in order to attend a concert, yes, you have to breathe that you'll only cough during the quiet, slow movement. But that is it is a challenge. A lot of times, there's also been a lot working, in getting the various permissions that are required. For example, doing something with the Juilliard String Quartet, probably took about more than 6 months of negotiation just to get that through, because each member had the right to agree to have it be issued.
This is an element a lot of people don't think about. And even when I did my little project a few years ago now, I joked that the licensing of just 2 composers that I had on that album, which was Philip Glass and Chick Corea, who's since unfortunately passed away. But that alone was enough to make me want to write my own music next time, I think, because it was a lot of work. And I can't imagine, especially on this CD, a lot of these pieces are still quite contemporary and I assume still covered by copyright. And, it's not like Brahms where you can just release it and it's okay. I mean, you have royalties to pay and licensing and probably permissions and all sorts of things, right?
Well, this is where having cooperation of the village and of the people who understand the importance of having this out for Stanley is important. And to be realistic about this, Sean, we're not dealing with a Taylor Swift or Beyonce thing. These are material that has been, some of it has not been available. And if it has been available, it's based on Stanley's long span of career. They're things that are been out there. And I know in some instances, the composers have wanted it to be out there. In the Bartok contrast, for example, that performance I was talking about that was engineered by Peter Bartok, which featured Robert Mann on violin and Leonard Hambro on piano, that's one that was not really readily available on CD. The fact that, that we made it readily available on CD was an important aspect for them.
Well, and it's interesting. So, kind of to loop back to my original question, because I remember when we first chatted, there was disc 1 to 5. And then I chatted with Stanley again after disc 6 and 7. Now there's disc 8 and 9. So, how many more are planned, if you can share, for this collection? Or because it seems like based on his recorded output, we could go on for a very long time. And also, his performances are quite famously each quite unique.
Yeah. Well, this is one of the things in his career where you would have pieces that really became landmarks musically as well as for what it did for clarinet playing. The Bartok contrasts was from the mid 1950s. Then in the mid 1960s, you had his Nielsen concerto that was conducted with Bernstein, and that also, by the way, was the Stanley did in one take. Then about 10 years after that came the Coriolano concerto, which also set again new standards. So often tease Stanley. I said, "Gee, when I had to audition to get into to Juilliard, at one point maybe one would play Weber or a Mozart concerto, and look what you've done now. First you made us play the Nielsen. Oh, gee, and after the Nielsen, now it came the Coriolano. It's like it just isn't fair.
It's kind of like how we can all blame the recital on, what was it, Liszt, right? Who sort of, yeah. I never thought about that. I wish I thought about that before when I was talking with Stanley, how he's so obvious, and I kind of asked it, I guess, in a roundabout way, but he's really shaped the clarinetist repertoire that students must learn now, because a lot of these pieces, he is the epicenter of those, as you say. One thing I did ask him though, which I kind of wanted your thought on too, was, throughout his career, a lot of these pieces, as you say, like those two we just discussed, but also on the CD here, the Berg, even like the Debussy, when he was younger, these were not just contemporary pieces in the sense that we would consider them in our textbooks, like they were new pieces. How have these pieces aged to you? And do you think that, there's pieces along the way that should have been included, but maybe people have forgot about that back in the day Stanley may have played, but have since sort of fallen out of favor? Or
Yeah. Well, it's interesting that when you mentioned about the Debussy, because Stanley joined the Philharmonic in 1948. And Debussy, for a lot of conservatory in educational establishments, the contemporary programming, was really the Impressionist. Debussy, Ravel, would have been fulfilled what it is to have a contemporary piece on the program. Interestingly, on disc 7, we have Stanley's performance of the Debussy Rhapsody with the New York Philharmonic and Leonard Bernstein. This piece, by the way, is only available on CD as part of a 45 disc set with the New York Philharmonic. So to have it here is interesting because you don't have to buy the other 44 discs in order to hear the Debussy. The timing of the Debussy Rhapsody with Bernstein is about 7 minutes and 46 seconds. On discs 8 and 9, we have the Debussy Rhapsody with the piano. Again, a studio recording, Sean, and the timing happens to be the exact.
No way.
Yeah, exact timing. Now, what is interesting is we have in discs 1 to 5 a live version of that, and it's a minute faster. And on a 7-minute piece, or 7 plus, 1 minute is a pretty big percentage. It's like 15. So that shows either what happens in a live concert or, maybe the pianist push things, but, I think that shows the variety. The other thing too is that Stanley, some of these things that we talk about is like hidden gems are part of the repertoire that's a little bit off the track. Michael Whalen, we have Mason, some pieces that the March in You that maybe are not as well known. And Stanley also did pieces, besides we have the Berg, he also did the things by David Dofsky. He did things, by Milton Babbitt, so that his willingness to explore, I think, music of his day, I think was also evidence.
Well, we're so fortunate for people like, him and also yourself and other players who have explored and been willing to explore these pieces, or otherwise we probably would never have really discovered them. But, it's interesting, the 3 versions of the Debussy on these various CDs in the set, because it's just a testament to how he is not only performing them differently himself, but different arrangements of the same piece even, and his ability to keep it fresh all the time is so incredible. It's something I asked him about too, is, how did you continue to maintain that freshness? Because so many orchestral players, I think they get bored in time because they're playing a lot of the same repertoire year after year after year. I mean, here I know that the local orchestra plays the Nutcracker every year, I couldn't imagine doing that 60 times,
Right.
60 seasons. Well, not 60 times. Let's say it's, 10 shows a time or 20 shows a time times 60 seasons or whatever. That would just be crazy, some of these pieces. But he has this intense focus on making the music fresh and interesting with every single time, which is just amazing.
There's an awful lot of spontaneity in his performances, and he approaches it, which is why a lot of his takes end up being, relatively the ones to use, so to speak. But the other thing too about as far as exploring things goes is that in discs 8 and 9, we also have a piece by Coriolano, the Soliloquy, and that's based on John's second movement of the concerto. So there's a situation where the music has been available, for a smaller musical force, one that could be, more readily included on people's concerts and recitals. So we're very happy to show and have that be part of the collection in order to show how it can be used and how it can be programmed.
One thing I've been noticing with the world, and we were talking about this last time in 2018, and it's only gotten even more pronounced, but many people don't even use CDs anymore. So is there a plan, or have these been released to Spotify or any other kind of streaming platform at this time, or is that not in the works?
There's been, it may be in the works, but what it was an important part of this is that increasingly we find that the packaging of the CDs becomes very important. And especially in dealing with the nature of what is the foundation or the genesis, the basis of this heritage collection is to really have this as a permanent legacy of getting all of Stanley's material, as much of it as possible, in one place. And that's also where, on this last Hidden Gems, some of the pieces are things that were available through European companies or independents. But it just so happens that I have a booklet that we have available, here, so that we have something in the CDs where we have, about a 40-page booklet that has, pictures of Stanley from, up through, as well as essays in here. This, we think, is a big important part of, issuing it this way. And also, one of the other aspects of this that we were hoping for, and I don't know whether or not with the pandemic, this has been one of the things which has affected it, Sean, has been as a teaching tool. Not to necessarily copy it, but basically, if you want to hear things more than once, if you want to hear how somebody else does it, if you want to be able to use it as what the possibilities of the instrument can do with one person. Not saying it's the only way to do it, but if you want to compare the way one person does it to another person and how it's done and how it's like getting a different opinion on something. The idea of having it where you can set it up that way on a CD rather than to stream, might be more helpful. Will it be that way? And are some things available on YouTube? The answer is yes. But that was not the main goal. The main goal was not to do something just to exist that way, but to really, get the best type of fidelity.
Well, I think there's such a fine line between, trying to navigate this current situation of accelerating technology, because one of the things that drives me nuts about streaming music is it's so focused on finding the next music or listening to music passively. Like I log into Apple Music and I want to just continue where I left off, like I would have with a CD. But it's always like, here's what's new and release, and here's when a workout playlist or whatever that's been updated. I'm just like, I don't care. Where is where's the thing I'm trying to deeply get into here? Whether it's an album or a piece or something, it always seems to lose track of where I was and push the next thing. And it dawned on me that perhaps instead of being designed poorly, that's actually how most people listen to music. And I found that shocking. because I don't want to just listen to everything for the first time all day long passively in the background while I do other tasks. Like, to me, the listening itself is one of the purposes of listening, which sounds crazy to say to a musician maybe, but maybe not to a non-musician. So I guess what I'm getting at here is that it sounds like the intent here is more to assemble the archival discs and hope that those who would benefit most from them are going to have that same astute kind of listening mentality and come across it, right?
Well, I think our goal is to start off at the, highest possible level. Then once we do that, then we could then take the material and work it different ways if need be. And if the demand is there.
I love it. So did I hear correctly that Stanley is not performing at this Clarinet Fest, right? But he was supposed to in 2020. Is that what had happened before it got canceled? Or is he performing this year?
What I'm aware of is something which I think I had mentioned, and certainly we did include it in the new volume 8 and 9. In February of 2020, Stanley actually appeared in a program of the New York Philharmonic, which means that was his 72nd year of being associated with the orchestra. I believe that as far as the Clarinet Fest, I believe he was scheduled to play maybe at this point 3 years ago, 2 or 3 years ago. But then the first one in Reno, Lake Tahoe was canceled. Then the one after that, I think, was going to be in Texas, and that one did not take place. And so Stanley is not going to be at this year's, which again is scheduled back for Reno and Lake Tahoe. But the following year is in Denver, and maybe by that time things are fine. And we also have to keep in mind that Stanley is now a very robust and with a 93-year-old person. So it's just phenomenal what how he still keeps going like the Energizer Bunny, And
absolutely, that's one of the things that amazes me about him too, is just the amount of time he's been doing it, and he still is so capable and there with you, and very much interested in still playing. And I asked him about when he might actually consider retiring, and also what he might have done if he had not chosen clarinet to do as a living, and he basically couldn't really, I don't think he could really fathom either question, right. Which is also very telling. I mean, a lot of people, myself included, I think, imagine retirement to look like sitting on a beach and
I don't know, maybe for Stanley, his idea of retirement will be just to schedule John Cage's 4 minutes and 33 seconds of silence, or something that way.
Yeah.
But no, but Stanley, we'll have our conversations, and he'll still complain about reeds and getting the rush, to just write, so he can use rush to try to file down some spots on his reeds. So
that's remarkable to me. And the other person who I had a similar conversation with, I think Eddie Daniels' 80th birthday, I talked to him on the podcast as well, and he said something similar. Like, I put in my 10,000 hours, and for the next 10,000 hours, I'm like, man, you're still practicing, 4 or 5, 6 hours a day, and there's no sign of it letting up ever. So you better get ready for the next generation of Eddie Daniels. And
absolutely. When you were talking about your bit percussion and everything else like that, I know that is my memory correct that on your album you did some extra work too?
Yeah, locally, especially for a few years before I started focusing on other things and hurt myself. But I was doing a lot of percussion doubling with local groups and things. I do play a fair bit of percussion, or I did play a fair bit of percussion. But yeah, I played marimba on 2 of the tracks on the CD.
Right. I wanted to make that. I wanted to make that connection on your album, which is a fantastic, fine presentation.
Well, thank you. Yeah, no, even live it was fun because we would actually switch. Like, I would put the clarinet down and go play those ones and come back and keep playing. And there was a little bit of an improv element to those pieces, especially live as well. So it was kind of neat to get to do that and use the skills that way. And it's one of the things too, as far as sharing music. I mean, that one CD project, sure, it was only that one project, but I mean, I must have played those pieces for schools at the university I teach at, the conservatory there, dozens and dozens of times for a lot of kids. And so the impact that this kind of CD project can have is really quite lasting. Not to mention one like even the Heritage Collection here. You're mentioning how it's going to influence recitals. And so for anyone listening, I mean, these sort of legacy projects, I think they're really important. So if you can put something down into a CD, I think you should do that and focus your energy into that. I mean, it's interesting because, Stanley here, we now have 9 CDs of performances, which is an incredible output for any person, but how many more are there?
Well, they do exist, and yes, there are plans. So we look forward to that. And for you and your listeners, we will keep you informed.
Absolutely. And speaking of the listeners, I'm going to add something after this is recorded, so I make sure to get it 100% accurate. But there will be a way for Clarinet listeners to purchase a signed copy of this disc set. And of course, don't forget about the previous 7 CDs that go with this collection. I think that if you have not yet experienced them or purchased them or added them to your collection, it's got to be one of those things that as a clarinet player, you're really going to have to consider purchasing. As they say, the history of the orchestra is in Stanley Drucker, but also actually the history of the clarinet at this point is really there as well. And this is all, thanks to the efforts of, especially, Jerry here for putting this together. And I want to thank him so much for doing that for the community.
You're very gracious, and I'm obviously humbled by that, by your comments. And the other thing too, which is also interesting, is that by being able to assemble these in one place, it really also makes it a good value. The fact that in one album, you can get the Bartok Contrast, the Nielsen Concerto, the Debussy Rhapsody, the Coriolano Concerto, all in one place is something that makes it, we think, not only great value musically, but also one from from being able to get a good value for that purchase.
Absolutely. So I now have a section of the show which I can't remember if we had before, but called the lightning round. So we'll skip to that in a second. Maybe we did do that last time. But before I do that, I wanted to ask, is there anything else you'd like to share with the Clarinet audience, or anything you wanted to ask me?
Well, in some of your questions, how do you feel that during these times that the Clarinet, how helpful you've been, for adding to the sense of community? Have you had some feedback from that?
It's funny you say that, because throughout the years, I have gotten a lot of messages from people, and sometimes from surprising people from all over the world who I just didn't know really are listening. So I've been asked before, like, what is the niche audience of the podcast, especially by advertisers and things. And I'm like, I wish there was a specific type of clarinetist, but it seems to be a lot of clarinetists at a lot of different age groups and a lot of different levels and countries. And like, the show has reached over 90 countries around the world and over 500,000 downloads now. Like, it's really made an impact. And I guess the weird thing to me is that it just feels kind of like sitting in my office talking to people. So it's odd in a way that it's these conversations I have that to me in my head are just kind of like phone calls that I can recall in that way. But to people listening all over the world, like they're making an impact and people are learning. And I think they're getting, which was the point of the podcast originally, kind of an insight into the lives of these clarinet players that otherwise we may not have had. So I do hope that kind of leaves a bit of a unique legacy in the clarinet world that maybe a lot of other instruments are starting to have. But, this is now, I think, the 6th or 7th year of this program. So it's there's quite a, catalog, I guess, or collection of episodes to look back on now and really sort of reflect on. But I have heard a lot about people really enjoying it all over the place. And, one girl I remember at Clarinet Fest 2017, actually, we were there together and people were coming up asking me for pictures. And at first I thought they were joking, but I realized they were serious. And I was like, man, there's so many people listening that seeing me is kind of like a treat of the festival. And I had this one young girl come up and want a picture. And she said that her family came there specifically to try and come and find and meet me. And that they often listen to the podcast while they do gardening together, and they listen to it the whole way down. And I was like, man, this is just, to me, it's crazy. Like I said, it feels just like having conversations with people who have become acquaintances and friends. But I mean, there is a wider impact, which I think is harder for me to see, but is definitely out there.
Well, it's certainly all been positive, and in just, hearing about some of the conversation we've had, it, in a way, turning back to Stanley, it's sort of interesting about fostering things that way, because one of the pieces on Disc 9 is by Rousakis, which he played at one of the clarinet fests, by the way. And this piece is the composer was actually a person who started the American Composers Orchestra, somebody who did actually started a library where, for contemporary composers, they could have facsimile editions done that they would help distribute. So he was somebody very, very involved in contemporary music. And then another piece on the album is Mcallister's Black Dog, which was written now, this was maybe about 20 years ago. And as far as being, also the instrumentation is interesting, because for Stanley, it was done with a symphonic band that was written for. So it definitely is, interesting how he is also, also wanted to be very, very much at the leading edge. And on the album, nothing could come after that.
I love it. So thank you so much, Jerry, for coming on the show today. If you're listening to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or any other free platform, the show will end here. But for those who are supporting the production of the show, thank you so much, and we will see you in a few moments in the lightning round. If you'd like to also support the production of the podcast, you can do this at clarinet.com/join. Thank you so much, Jerry, for coming on the show today.
Always a pleasure to be with you, Sean, and thank you.
The new Bakun Q-Series clarinet features a completely redesigned bore inspired by the Bakun Custom Series clarinets. This means you can play and perform like the pros, but for less. Use code CLARINET at bakunmusical.com to save 10% on your entire purchase, and try the Bakun Q-Series or Protégé clarinet risk-free for 30 days. Just pay the return shipping if you aren't fully satisfied. Shop now at bakunmusical.com and use code CLARINET at checkout. Imagine a reed that lets you focus on your music, lasts for months instead of days, and even saves you money in the long run. It's all possible with Leger Reeds, the world's leading synthetic reed brand made right here in Canada. The European cut reed is preferred by Leger artists all over the world, including Eddie Daniels, David Schifrin, Corrado Giuffretti, and many others. It offers a warm, clean sound with a great ease of articulation and is now available for E-flat, B-flat, and the bass clarinet. Learn more at your local music store, or you can now save 10% on your Leger reeds with code CLARINET at checkout at leger.com. That's LEGERE.com.